David Bowie made millions from hits like Let's Dance and Heroes, then suddenly refused to play them. In 2004, he canceled his tour mid-show and vanished from public life. Manager begged him to do a greatest hits tour. The money would have been insane, but Bowie said, "No, I'd rather die than become a nostalgia act," he told friends. His childhood friend called it stubborn. His fans called it selfish, but the real reason was darker than anyone knew. David Bowie was born David Robert Jones on January 8, 1947, in Brixton, London. His mother, Margaret Mary Peggy Burns, worked as a cinema usherette, and his father, Haywood Stenton John Jones, was a promotions officer for a children's charity. Their home at 40 Stansfield Road sat on the border of Brixton and Stockwell, a busy part of London filled with working-class families. Bowie grew up surrounded by music, cinema, and the energy of a changing city. From an early age, he stood out. At just 9 years old, his teachers called his dancing astonishing and vividly artistic. He moved with a natural rhythm that set him apart from the other kids. His father noticed his love for music and brought home records by American artists like Little Richard and Elvis Presley. The first time Bowie heard Tutti Frutti, he later said, "I had heard God." That song changed everything. By the time he turned 13 in 1961, he had picked up a saxophone and started taking lessons from Ronnie Ross, a respected baritone saxophonist. A big influence in his life was his half-brother, Terry Burns. Terry introduced him to beat literature and jazz legends like John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy. Through him, Bowie discovered a world of ideas and music beyond what was popular at the time. But Terry struggled with mental illness and was later institutionalized. His tragic suicide in 1985 left a lasting impact on Bowie, inspiring songs like Jump They Say, which reflected on fear, struggle, and loss. In February 1962, when Bowie was 15, something happened that would change his appearance forever. He got into a fight with his friend George Underwood over a girl. During the argument, Underwood punched him in the left eye, causing serious damage. Doctors at Moorfields Eye Hospital performed emergency surgery, but the injury left his pupil permanently dilated. His eye became a deep, fixed black, giving him the famous look that would later add to his mysterious image. Despite what happened, Bowie and Underwood remained friends. They even worked together on music and art in later years. The road to fame was long and full of setbacks. Between 1964 and 1969, Bowie released 10 singles under different names and bands, including Davy Jones and the King Bees, the Manish Boys, and Davy Jones and the Lower Third. None of them became hits. His first single, Liza Jane, came out in 1964, but even with TV promotions, it failed to gain attention. In 1966, he decided to change his name to avoid confusion with Davy Jones of the Monkees. He chose David Bowie, inspired by American frontiersman Jim Bowie and his famous knife. It was his first big reinvention, but success was still far away. His music kept struggling to find an audience. The 1967 single The Laughing Gnome failed, and his self-titled debut album from the same year didn't make an impact. Industry professionals weren't impressed either. In 1965, after auditioning with the Lower Third for the BBC, the feedback was brutal. Amateur-sounding vocalist who sings wrong notes. Group has nothing to recommend it. To support himself, he took jobs wherever he could, even working as a kitchen cleaner while chasing his dream. During this time, Bowie explored different ways to express himself. He studied mime under Lindsay Kemp, who taught him how to use movement as part of a performance. He also experimented with avant-garde theater, drawing inspiration from kabuki and commedia dell'arte. Audiences didn't always understand what he was doing. At one show, where he opened for Tyrannosaurus Rex, the crowd had no idea what to make of his performance. They expected rock, not theatrical mime, and their reaction was mostly confusion. David Bowie's journey to stardom had many twists, but his first big breakthrough came in 1969 with Space Oddity. The song was released on July 11th, just 5 days before Apollo 11 launched toward the moon. 9 days later, Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the lunar surface. The timing was perfect. The BBC used Space Oddity in their Apollo 11 coverage, making it an unofficial soundtrack to one of humanity's greatest achievements. But despite the connection, Bowie didn't write the song about the moon landing. His real inspiration came from 2001: A Space Odyssey, the sci-fi masterpiece directed by Stanley Kubrick. Bowie later admitted that watching the film while under the influence of drugs had a huge impact on him. The song tells the story of Major Tom, an astronaut who leaves Earth and loses contact with ground control. Its eerie sound, built around a mellotron, set it apart from anything else at the time. Producer Tony Visconti initially dismissed it as a cheap attempt to cash in on the space craze, but Gus Dudgeon took over and saw its potential. When it hit the charts, it climbed to number 5 in the UK, marking Bowie's first real success. Over the years, Space Oddity became much more than a hit song. In 2013, Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield performed it aboard the International Space Station, turning it into the first music video filmed in space. Bowie never stayed in one place for long. In 1972, he introduced Ziggy Stardust, a persona that changed rock music forever. Ziggy was an androgynous alien rock star, a messenger sent to Earth with a warning about its impending doom. The character was the heart of Bowie's album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, released on June 16, 1972. Ziggy's look was just as bold as his music. Bright red hair, theatrical makeup, and glittering jumpsuits made him impossible to ignore. His style pulled from many influences: English rocker Vince Taylor, Japanese kabuki theater, and Texan musician, the legendary Stardust Cowboy. The album told a complete story. Ziggy arrives on Earth, becomes a rock icon, and is ultimately destroyed by fame. Songs like Starman, Moonage Daydream, and Rock and Roll Suicide carried listeners through his rise and fall. Starman became a massive hit after Bowie's performance on Top of the Pops, where he casually draped his arm around guitarist Mick Ronson. The move was subtle, but in 1972, it was groundbreaking. Audiences had never seen anything like it. Ziggy blurred the line between performer and character, between male and female, between human and alien. The persona was so powerful that Bowie struggled to separate himself from it. He later admitted that playing Ziggy for nearly 2 years made it difficult to tell where the character ended, and he began. The pressure of maintaining the image, combined with an exhausting tour schedule, started to take its toll. On July 3, 1973, at London's Hammersmith Odeon, Bowie shocked fans by announcing Ziggy's retirement. He closed the show by telling the crowd, "Not only is this the last show of this tour, it's the last show we'll ever do." Even his band was caught off guard. Many thought Bowie was quitting music entirely, but he was simply saying goodbye to Ziggy. There were several reasons for the decision. Financially, the Ziggy Stardust tour had become unsustainable due to mismanagement and overspending. Creatively, Bowie needed to move on. The character had become so famous that it started to overshadow the man behind it. He had more ideas, more personas to create, and staying in one place too long wasn't in his nature. By the mid-1970s, David Bowie was one of the biggest rock stars in the world. But behind the fame, his life was falling apart. He was trapped in a cycle of heavy cocaine use, paranoia, and isolation. Los Angeles had swallowed him whole. By 1974, he was deep in addiction, surviving on little more than red bell peppers and milk. His weight dropped to a dangerous 95 pounds. His mind was slipping. He later admitted that this was the lowest point of his life. Paranoia consumed him. He became obsessed with the occult, Nazi Germany, and secret histories. His home in LA was just a few doors away from the site of the infamous Manson family murders. He believed dark forces were after him. The paranoia was so intense that he began storing his urine in bottles, afraid that spirits could use it against him. Hallucinations blurred the line between reality and delusion. He described it as falling into the bowels of the earth. The world outside became a threat. talent. Somehow, through all of this, he kept making music. His 1976 album Station to Station was a product of his unraveling mind. It introduced the Thin White Duke, a cold and detached character that mirrored his fractured state. Bowie later admitted he had no memory of recording the album. Cocaine had wiped those months from his mind. Looking back, he called this the darkest period of his life. By early 1976, he knew he couldn't go on like this. His assistant Coco Schwab convinced him to leave LA. He packed up and escaped to Europe. It was a decision that would save his life. The Thin White Duke wasn't just a stage persona. It became part of Bowie's real life. The character was elegant, sharp-dressed, and eerily emotionless. Bowie described him as a very Aryan, fascist type. He played the role so well that it started to bleed into his public image. That year, in drug-fueled interviews, he made comments that shocked the world. He spoke about fascism in ways that alarmed fans. In one interview, he said that Hitler was one of the first rock stars. In another, he suggested Britain might benefit from a fascist leader. His words caused outrage. People began questioning where he really stood. The controversy exploded in May 1976 when he arrived in London's Victoria Station. As he waved to fans from an open car window, a photographer captured a moment that looked like a Nazi salute. Bowie denied it, saying it was just a bad angle, but the damage was done. The Thin White Duke had gone too far. Years later, he distanced himself from this period. He blamed his drug use and admitted that his mind was in a dangerous place. He called the Duke a nasty character and referred to that time as the worst of his life. The controversy faded, but the Thin White Duke remained one of his most complex creations. In late 1976, Bowie left Los Angeles behind and moved to Berlin. He needed to escape the madness. Iggy Pop joined him, also trying to break free from addiction. They settled in a modest apartment above an auto repair shop in West Berlin's Schöneberg district. The city was divided by the Berlin Wall, full of tension and history. It was the opposite of LA. Bowie could disappear there. At first, old habits lingered. Bowie and Iggy still had reckless nights. One night, they rammed their dealer's car and tried to crash into a wall at high speed. But over time, things changed. Bowie found inspiration in Berlin's underground art scene. He spent time in cafes, drag bars, and clubs like Jungle. He listened to German krautrock bands like Kraftwerk and Neu. Their experimental sounds pushed him in a new direction. During this period, he also worked closely with Iggy Pop. Bowie co-wrote and produced The Idiot and Lust for Life, two albums that helped relaunch Iggy's career. But more than anything, Berlin became a place of healing. Bowie later described it as a city full of tension, but it gave him exactly what he needed. Between 1977 and 1979, Bowie recorded what became known as the Berlin Trilogy. These three albums, Low, 1977, Heroes, 1977, and Lodger, 1979, marked a radical shift in his music. They broke away from his past, embracing electronic and ambient sounds. Low came first. It was recorded partly in France, but shaped by his Berlin experience. It had an experimental structure, one side full of fragmented rock songs, the other filled with haunting instrumentals. The song Warschauer, co-written with Brian Eno, captured the eerie atmosphere of Cold War Europe. When the album was released in January 1977, many fans and critics were confused. It was unlike anything he had done before. Over time, Low became one of his most celebrated works. Later that year, he recorded Heroes. It was made entirely in Berlin, near the wall. Its title track was inspired by a real couple Bowie saw kissing near the wall, a small act of defiance in a divided city. The song's iconic sound came from a unique recording technique. Multiple microphones were placed at different distances, capturing Bowie's voice in layers as he sang louder. The result was one of his most powerful anthems. The trilogy ended with Lodger in 1979. It was different from the other two, incorporating world music influences and early new wave sounds. Unlike the first two albums, it wasn't recorded in Berlin, but in Switzerland and New York. At first, it received mixed reviews, but over time, its adventurous style gained recognition. David Bowie's Let's Dance was more than just an album. It was a turning point that launched him into global superstardom. Released on April 14, 1983, it marked a bold shift in his sound. He teamed up with Nile Rodgers of Chic, blending post-disco, dance pop, and new wave for a polished, radio-friendly style. The album was recorded in December 1982 at the Power Station in New York, with a then unknown Texas blues guitarist, Stevie Ray Vaughan, on lead guitar. The title track, Let's Dance, dropped as a single on March 14, 1983, and became Bowie's biggest hit, topping charts worldwide. Its music video, shot in Australia, dominated MTV, introducing him to a new generation. Two more singles, China Girl and Modern Love, also became massive hits, backed by equally popular videos. Bowie had mastered the art of visuals and music, making Let's Dance a full-blown phenomenon. The album sold over 10.7 million copies worldwide, making it his best-selling record. It debuted at #1 in the UK for 3 weeks and peaked at #4 in the US, staying on the Billboard charts for 69 weeks. By mid-1983, Bowie had 10 albums in the UK top 100 simultaneously, a record-breaking feat. 3 years later, Bowie took on one of his most iconic film roles. In 1986, he starred as Jareth the Goblin King in Jim Henson's fantasy movie, Labyrinth. The film followed Sarah, played by Jennifer Connelly, as she journeyed through a magical labyrinth to rescue her baby brother from Jareth. It was a mix of fairy tale adventure, surreal puppetry, and music, with Bowie playing a villain who was both menacing and strangely charismatic. The production was ambitious. Written by Monty Python's Terry Jones and executive produced by George Lucas, Labyrinth was filmed between April and September 1985 with elaborate sets in England and New York. Jim Henson's Creature Shop created its unique puppetry, while fantasy artist Brian Froud designed its dreamlike aesthetic. Bowie contributed to the film's soundtrack, with Magic Dance becoming a cult favorite. One behind-the-scenes moment had him providing baby sound effects himself because the toddler actor refused to cooperate. Despite its creativity, Labyrinth struggled at the box office. With a $25 million budget, it earned only $12.9 million in the US, but performed better overseas, grossing $34 million. Critics were unsure of how to categorize it: too strange for children, too whimsical for adults. By 1989, Bowie was ready to break away from pop superstardom. That year, he formed Tin Machine, a hard rock band with guitarist Reeves Gabrels and the Sales Brothers, Hunt on drums and Tony on bass. Unlike his solo projects, Tin Machine operated as a democracy, with every member having equal creative input. Their debut album, Tin Machine, released on May 22, 1989, was raw and aggressive. Recorded live with minimal overdubs at Mountain Studios in Switzerland and Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas, it tackled themes of world issues and personal struggles. Heaven's in Here showcased Gabrel's experimental guitar work, while Bowie's rougher vocals fit the heavier sound. Critics were divided. Some called it ahead of its time, a precursor to the grunge movement. Others dismissed it as chaotic. Fans were also confused. Bowie had spent years as a global icon, and now he was just another member of a band. The Tin Machine tour was a stark contrast to his stadium shows, with the band playing in small venues with no flashy production. For Bowie, though, Tin Machine was a creative reset. He later called it a lifeline, saying it helped him escape the stagnation of the mid-'80s. Gabrels, in particular, pushed him toward a more experimental style that shaped his later work. The band released 2 studio albums and 1 live album before disbanding in 1992 due to internal conflicts and poor sales. Many fans dismissed Tin Machine at the time, but in hindsight, it was a crucial step. It reignited Bowie's passion for music and set him on a path for future reinventions. Years later, he reflected on Tin Machine with appreciation, saying, "They charged me up. I can't tell you how much." David Bowie's life was full of love, struggles, and reinvention. He married Mary Angela Barnett on March 20, 1970, at Bromley Register Office in London. Most people assumed it was a traditional love story, but Angie later revealed that their marriage was partly for convenience. It helped her secure a work permit in the UK. Still, they shared a strong connection and worked together in shaping Bowie's Ziggy Stardust persona. She encouraged his creative risks and helped build the image that made him famous. On May 30th, 1971, they had their only child, Duncan Zoe Haywood Jones. Bowie was overjoyed and wrote the song Kooks to celebrate his son's birth. He loved being a father, but fame changed everything. His career was exploding, and his drug use was increasing. Angie said their relationship shifted between personal and professional, but over time, they grew apart. After their divorce, Duncan stayed with Bowie, and his relationship with Angie became strained. By the time he was 13, they had stopped speaking. Duncan later became a successful film director, earning a BAFTA for his debut movie Moon in 2009. In 1980, Bowie finalized his divorce from Angie. Their 10-year marriage ended with a $500,000 settlement paid in installments. The agreement also included a gag order preventing Angie from discussing their relationship for 10 years. She later claimed she was a key part of his early success, but Bowie saw things differently. He called her corrosive and cut ties completely. His second marriage was nothing like his first. In 1990, Bowie met Somali supermodel Iman at a dinner party. He was instantly in love and pursued her with a passion he had never felt before. They married on April 24, 1992, in Lausanne, Switzerland. A second ceremony took place in Florence, Italy. Unlike his first marriage, this relationship was built on deep love and respect. They kept their personal lives private, avoiding the media. Bowie later said he had not married a celebrity. He had married his soulmate. On August 15, 2000, Bowie and Iman welcomed their daughter, Alexandria Zara Jones, known as Lexi. She was born at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan, weighing 7 pounds, 4.6 ounces. Bowie was there for the birth and even cut the umbilical cord himself. It was a moment of pure happiness for the couple. They had struggled with infertility for years, making Lexi's birth feel like a miracle. Bowie slowed down his career to focus on family, wanting to watch his daughter grow up. David Bowie's A Reality Tour was the longest and most ambitious tour of his career. It started on October 7, 2003, in Copenhagen, and ended on July 25, 2004, in Mountain View, California. With over 110 shows across Europe, North America, Asia, and Oceania, the tour was massive. It was also Bowie's first time performing in Australia and New Zealand. Since his Glass Spider tour in 1987, he played in 17 countries and to more than 1 million fans. The set list was a mix of new songs from Reality and classics like Rebel Rebel, Heroes, and Life on Mars. The tour grossed $46 million and was the 9th highest grossing tour of 2004. Bowie's band was packed with talent. Earl Slick was on lead guitar, adding a raw electric edge to the sound. Gail Ann Dorsey handled bass and provided powerful vocals. Jerry Leonard, serving as band leader and guitarist, brought atmospheric textures. Sterling Campbell kept the rhythm steady on drums, while Mike Garson's signature piano and keyboard work added a unique touch. Catherine Russell played additional keyboards and sang backup vocals, filling out the band's dynamic sound. Bowie was always ahead of his time, and this tour was no different. In September 2003, before the official tour even began, he put on one of the first ever live-streamed rock concerts. It was broadcast worldwide from London in 5.1 surround sound, proving once again that Bowie was always pushing boundaries. Then, suddenly, it all stopped. On June 25, 2004, Bowie played what would become his final full concert at the Hurricane Festival in Germany. A few days earlier, in Prague, he had felt severe chest pain. Doctors misdiagnosed it as nerve damage. He continued performing, ignoring the pain. That night in Germany, he finished his set but collapsed backstage. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors found an acutely blocked artery. Emergency angioplasty saved his life, but the rest of the tour was canceled. Bowie recovered, but he never toured again. In 2006, he officially retired from live performances. After decades on the road, he stepped away from touring for good. For the next 10 years, Bowie stayed almost completely out of the public eye. No new music, no concerts, no interview. His silence was so complete that rumors spread about his health and whether he would ever return. His last formal interview had been in 2003, and he had no plans to do another. There were only a few rare appearances. In September 2005, he performed with Arcade Fire at the Fashion Rocks event in New York, joining them for Wake Up and two of his own songs. The following year, he joined David Gilmour on stage at the Royal Albert Hall, singing Comfortably Numb and Arnold Lane. In 2013, he contributed backing vocals to Arcade Fire's song Reflector. These moments were exciting for fans, but they were rare. Bowie stayed out of the spotlight, living quietly in New York with his wife, Iman, and their daughter, Lexi. Then, on January 8, 2013, his 66th birthday, everything changed. Without warning, Bowie announced a new album the next day. It was a complete surprise. No rumors, no press, just an announcement and a song called Where Are We Now? The single shot to #1 on the UK iTunes chart, while fans and critics scrambled to understand what had just happened. Bowie had secretly recorded the album between May 2011 and October 2012 in New York. Everyone involved had signed non-disclosure agreements to keep it a secret. The album was an instant hit. It debuted at #1 in the UK, Belgium, Germany, Ireland, and Switzerland. In the US, it reached #2 on the Billboard 200, making it Bowie's highest charting album there. Critics called it one of the greatest comebacks in music history. The album cover was a striking reworking of Heroes, with a white square covering Bowie's face. It was a clear message. He was acknowledging his past, but refusing to be defined by it. Despite the album's success, Bowie didn't tour or promote it. He didn't give interviews or perform live. He let the music stand on its own. This decision wasn't new. Even before his heart attack, Bowie had begun moving away from nostalgia-driven performances. On his outside tour in 1995, he avoided playing many of his biggest hits. He wanted to focus on new music rather than repeat the past. By the time a reality tour happened, he had found a balance between old and new. But after 2004, he was done with touring entirely. Even after The Next Day became a global success, he turned down every offer to perform. It wasn't just about health, it was about staying true to his artistic vision. He had no interest in being a legacy act. David Bowie's final album, Black Star, was more than just music. It was a carefully crafted farewell, a last gift to the world from an artist who had always lived on his own terms. Released on January 8, 2016, his 69th birthday, the album arrived just 2 days before his death. Fans had no idea that Bowie had been battling liver cancer for 18 months. He had kept his diagnosis a secret, revealing it only to a small group of friends and collaborators. When the news of his passing broke on January 10th, the album's meaning changed instantly. It was no longer just a record, it was a goodbye. Producer Tony Visconti later described Black Star as Bowie's parting gift, and the music makes that clear. The song Lazarus opens with the haunting line, "Look up here, I'm in heaven." The music video shows Bowie lying in a hospital bed, frail yet intense, a man staring directly at his own mortality. The title track, Black Star, is even more mysterious. A blend of jazz, electronic elements, and eerie vocals, it creates an atmosphere that feels otherworldly, almost like Bowie was already reaching beyond life itself. The album was recorded in secret at the Magic Shop studio in New York City. Bowie, always one to evolve, wanted a sound unlike anything he had done before. He worked with jazz musicians like Donny McCaslin and Mark Guiliana, pushing them to experiment, to go beyond structure and expectation. The result was an avant-garde masterpiece, full of cryptic lyrics and layered meanings. Even as his health declined, Bowie remained completely dedicated to his art. He kept working, kept creating, right up until the very end. When Black Star was released, critics immediately praised it as one of Bowie's finest works. It debuted at #1 in the UK and became his first album to top the US Billboard 200. In 2017, it won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Alternative Music Album. But beyond the awards and the chart success, Black Star became something more. Fans and scholars have dissected its lyrics and visuals, searching for deeper meanings. Every note, every image feels like a carefully placed piece of a final message, one that will be studied and felt for generations.